There's your chair. I was going to say good morning, but it's not morning, is it? Well, welcome. Thank you for coming out on a kind of snowy day. If you want to come forward so you can see Dan better, he was told he can't go out of the light. So that we're videotaping it and live streaming it, otherwise he'll be black and no one would see his face. So anyway, you can come forward if you would like, or squish in, just so that you can see Dan and hear him. He's very tall, so you'll be able to see him, probably most anyway. This is St. Philip the Deacon's Restore 2 series. We've been expecting you. I'm Susan Path, and I'm the parish nurse and the coordinator of this program, the series of 3. So today's the first session. Next session will be next week, and that will be Tai Chi and Faith Yoga. I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end. And then the next week is Faith and Life, if you want to come to that, with Jennifer Farr Davis, who is also, I think, will be very, very interesting and kind of tie into walking in nature and purpose of God. So that would be a good thing to come to. And then we would resume then on February 13th with Joel Warren, who will be also in here. And you see the schedule in your little folder today. And I want to thank the people who helped me put the folders together. And also you'll find in today's folder the handout that Dan, our speaker today, will be using. And then you got these little cards, and those are for you to take home. And a lot of them are from Dan's book. And one is Joel's, our last speakers. And then there's some other tools in here, and we'll talk about them throughout. So bring this in your folder every week if you can. How many of you attended last year's series? Great, great. Did you feel like raise your hand if you felt like you benefited from it? Okay. And how many of you came in the snowstormy nights? Thank you. I appreciated that. We had 80 people here that night, and 90 live streamed it that night, so that was pretty awesome. I hope you're able to utilize that in your daily life. At St. Philip the Deacon, we're committed to caring and healing. We have seen how difficult the world around us is to navigate, and often compromising our health and well-being. Last year, we started a ripple of healing in the community by presenting you with tools of calming, sleep, positive psychology, happiness, movement, and meditation. Our intention is to bring growth, resilience, healing to the community by giving you tools to step out of habitual cycles and gain a sense of control over emotional reactions, and develop patterns and practices that enhance your well-being. We have fantastic presenters this time, and are ready to help calm your minds by teaching you spiritual practices and meditative movements. I will start with a little devotion. Slow me down, Lord. Ease the pounding of my heart by the quietening of my mind. Steady my hurried pace with a vision of the eternal reach of time. Give me amid the confusion of the day the calmness of the everlasting hills. Slow me down, Lord. Teach me the art of taking minute vacations, of lingering to study an azalea bush, or to chat with a neighbor, to pat an animal. Slow me down, Lord, that I may know the race is not always to the swift, and that life consists of more than an increasing tempo. Let me look into branches of the towering elms and learn that they all grow tall because they rise slowly and ably. Slow me down, Lord, that I might send my roots deep into the soil of life's enduring values, and so reach toward the stars of an infinite destiny. Let the still small voice of him who gave his son for us speak to me and through me of peace and victory that passes all understanding. Then speed me on, Lord, arm me with diligence and longing to redeem each opportune moment for thee, to share with friend and stranger, the one who steadies my gait as I walk this stony path toward the boundless reaches of eternal love. Yeah. So after our last series, I read the evaluations of many of you that are here tonight, and many of you said you were interested in meditation and spiritual practices. And I asked around, and Daniel Wolpert's name came up, and I ordered his book, Creating a Life with God, which several of his practices are in here, and thought these were really great. And I thought, wow, those are good tools that we should pass on to the people in our community to help them steer through the paths of this world. And I walked into Pastor Valerie's office, and Dan's book was laying on her desk. And then I went to talk to Cheryl, and Cheryl had it in her office also. And so I said, that's who I was thinking about having come for the Restore series next year. And they said, go for it. Great. So here he is. Let me tell you a little bit about Dan. He told me he has no favorites. I usually ask people, what's your favorite thing, or what's something you could tell me about, but he has no favorite thing. He has no favorites. So I think that's pretty interesting. Anyway, Daniel Wolpert is a healer, a student of spiritual life, worked as a research scientist, psychologist, spiritual director, farmer, teacher, and construction worker, earning his Master's of Divinity degree at San Francisco Theological Seminary. Over the past 30 years, he has taught in the fields of psychology and spiritual formation, led retreats, and delivered talks in such settings as the Art of Spiritual Direction program at SFTS, the Youth Ministry and Spirituality Project, National Ministry Conferences, UCLA, UND, medical schools, Luther Seminary, a 5-day academy for spiritual formation, and numerous other settings around the world. He has also played key roles in developing environments for contemplation and for the formation of spiritual leaders, as he has helped to build or restore monasteries, theological schools, and retreat centers across North America. In addition, he is having to be full-time and interim pastor positions over the past 2 decades. He also pursues his spiritual direction and healing work in private practice. Daniel is the co-founder and executive director of Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing, and the author of Leading a Life with God, The Practice of Spiritual Leadership, and Creating a Life with God, The Call of Ancient Prayer Practices, and also has co-authored other books, and as well as numerous articles and in book chapters on meditation and healing. Currently, he's working on a new book on spiritual practice and climate change, to be out in the fall of 2020. Join me in welcoming Dan Wolpert.
All right, well, good evening. And thank you for coming out in the snow. I think it will be a spiritual practice driving home. All right. Well, I'd like to start with a couple of minutes of quiet. So why don't we do that? Let us pray. right, well, I'm very happy to be here tonight, and thank you, Susan, and folks at the church, and for having me. It's really great, and I'm very excited about this material. This is the material that this new book that's coming out in the fall is focusing on, and as in a nice little synchronous event, I just got a proof for the cover of the book today, so I'm pretty excited about that. It's really nice. So if you're interested in this, or this seems interesting, then in a few months you can read more about it. The way that we're going to go tonight is I'm going to talk for a while, and this is not material that is easily covered in a short period of time, so we'll be moving through a lot of different things, and that's just the nature of an hour or so time together. And then we want to make sure to have time for questions and interactions. I also may pause in the middle for some questions and things, and because that's kind of my favorite part, actually. And and as Susan said, I have to stay far away from you guys so that the video works, but that makes me a little sad. I would like to be kind of down over there. All right, so what we're going to be looking at is a particular way of engaging and practicing our spiritual life in relation to creation. So that's the overall theme. And we begin with kind of this basic paradox of our time and our society, which is that our society, which is incredibly wealthy and incredibly powerful and incredibly well developed, the richer and more powerful we become, the more anxious we are becoming. And my guess is that many of you know the various statistics about anxiety and depression in our society, but basically this has become a major epidemic, along with a number of other kinds of somewhat related mental states, things like loneliness, addiction, all these sorts of things. And particularly in terms of anxiety, the rates of that are extraordinarily high for young people. And so, there's this kind of strange thing going on. It's like you'd think we'd be less anxious because we're all set, but we're more anxious. And Jesus' admonition to not be anxious really seems impossible. It's another one of those things where we think, well, maybe Jesus was just kidding when he said that. So that's just something that we notice, that our relationship with ourselves and the world, each other, our experience is often full of anxiety. Now, as people of faith, we're really called to ask this question, how do we engage God? How do we encounter God? Right? Because that's supposedly what we're up to as people of faith. We're living into this life that we've been given. And so that's one of the things really that the spiritual life is all about, is trying to help us to explore this issue. How do we relate to the divine? And then, of course, is that helpful to us, which supposedly it is, and that's what we hear. And so how do we do that? For this particular set of practices, I really want to focus a great deal or use some of the resources of what is called the wisdom tradition in our faith. Now, the wisdom tradition comes out of several of the books of the Bible. We're all pretty familiar with Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Job is a wisdom tradition book. There are a number of Psalms that are wisdom tradition books. Jesus mentions wisdom a number of times. And so this is a particular strain within our faith background, a particular series of teachings. And sadly, it's actually a part of our faith experience that we often don't know a whole lot about, which is too bad, because the wisdom tradition has several really valuable aspects to it, which is that it is experiential, so it really asks us to attend to our experience. It's very immediate, right, because experience is very immediate if we start paying attention to it. And it really asks us to reflect upon our lives. Right? How are we engaging our lives? How are we engaging ourselves? How are we engaging each other? How are we engaging our faith life? How are we engaging society? So the wisdom tradition, I think, is a great resource, and it also is very much interested in creation. Because wisdom is actually, in the Bible, is personified, right? It's a woman. I think this is one of the reasons that this tradition isn't so popular, right? Because the idea that there's this incredibly powerful, brilliant female figure is often not looked upon very well in patriarchal societies and religion. So wisdom is personified as this woman who is intimately involved with God in the created order. And so Proverbs talks about the fact that she is beside God or in relationship with God like a master craftsperson, and the two of them together are bringing the created world into being. And they're having fun. And it says they are delighting in their activity. Right? And so we have this beautiful image, right, of the divine and this spiritual person bringing creation into being. And so creation, of which, of course, we are a part, we tend to separate ourselves out from creation, but we're not separate from creation. So creation is this delightful entity, this delightful thing that springs into being as a result of the activity of the divine and of wisdom. Now, one of the things that the Protestants did, which was kind of a sad thing, is they kicked a couple of books out of the Bible. So one of the books that they kicked out of the Bible is a book that is actually called The Wisdom of Solomon, or Wisdom. So this is in the Catholic Bible and was in the Bible for most people for most of our history. So it's still a pretty good book. And this is one of the passages from Wisdom, and it's really beautiful. So I'll actually read it. Wisdom is radiant and unfading, and she is easily discerned by those who love her and is found by those who seek her. She hastens to make herself known to those who desire her. He who rises early to seek her will have no difficulty, for he will find her sitting at his gates. To fix one's thought on her is perfect understanding, and he who is vigilant on her account will soon be free from care, because she goes about seeking those worthy of her, and she graciously appears to them in their paths and meets them in every thought. That's one of my favorite phrases of the whole Bible. Right? This idea that wisdom can meet us in every thought. And so an awareness of that and a practice of that is really what the spiritual life is about. Right? Are we engaged in this seeking? And you see that the result of that seeking is that we are free from care. Right? This is the cure for anxiety. Right? To meet wisdom in every thought brings this incredible sense of peace and beauty. We hear that wisdom is radiant and unfading. She is more valuable than gold and jewels. And peace is every wise path. Right? So she's pretty cool. All right. So creation is the most immediate aspect of our experience. It is the most immediate aspect of our experience. We would not be alive if we were not breathing. I imagine all of you are doing at least some breathing as you're sitting there. Although we don't breathe very much. We don't breathe nearly as much as we should, but we do breathe enough to stay alive. So every time we breathe, we are engaging a part of the created world. My guess is you all had dinner. You took a walk outside. We are continually interacting with the created world. Right? And so this is a really valuable way to deepen our faith life and to seek the divine, is to understand more deeply what that interaction with the created world, which again is outside of us, but it's also inside of us. Right? So our heartbeats, our thoughts, our feelings, all of these are part of creation. So in this set of practices, we are bringing our attention to the created reality. Now, what I'm doing in this work is that I'm integrating the wisdom tradition and a lot of these insights with something that is called five-element theory. Now, five-element theory comes to us from Asia and is a very interesting way of understanding the human being. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time commenting on this, but I will just make one comment because, sometimes people are unhappy when you think that you're taking something from outside of Christianity and helping us to understand our faith more. Which is kind of interesting because most of those same people love having Christmas trees in their house on Christmas. Now, you may or may not know this, but Jesus didn't have a Christmas tree. And in fact, Christmas trees come to us from a lot of the indigenous tribes and practices of Northern Europe. And that's just one of, I could give you hundreds and hundreds of examples of things that people have brought into our faith from other places and cultures and times, really to help us understand more deeply really who God is. Okay, so that's what I'm doing, and if it bothers you a lot, I'm sorry. I apologize. Because I don't want to bother anybody, but sometimes people get bothered. Okay, so the five elements that I'm working with, and depending on what culture you look at in Asia, there's a different set of elements. They vary a bit. But the ones that I'm looking at are water, air, fire, earth, and space. Now, the idea behind five-element theory is that it's very similar to our modern scientific elemental theory, right? In that it says that all of creation is made up of basic elements. Now, we happen to have a much bigger elemental theory in modern science, right? I think we're up to 118 elements or something like that. But in the ancient world, there were many fewer elements, and in this case, there were five. And so the idea is that each one of these elements manifests wisdom. Right? So in the same way that God and wisdom are working together in creation, and we say that creation is inspirited, right? That's one of the things we say about creation, that God's Spirit is working in and through everything. And so these elements manifest the wisdom of the divine. But they manifest them in different ways, in slightly different ways. Right? And each one of these elements has a particular set of qualities. And we can think of this as, we talk in theology about the attributes of God. And so we can think that each one of these elements manifests different attributes of the divine. And, if you get a systematic theology book, you can read, and there's dozens and dozens of attributes of God, right? So God is loving, and God is caring, and God is powerful, and God is wise, and God acts. All of these are attributes of the divine. And so in this particular system, these attributes, these qualities, manifest through these elements. And so because we are made up of these elements, they manifest in us, but then they also manifest outside of us as well. Okay, so our mind, our experience, we relate to these elemental energies very directly, both the ones internally and the ones externally. Now, one of the things that we say about us as human beings, right, is that we have an ego self. Sometimes in Christianity we talk about a fallen self, but we have this ego self that we need to have in order to function in the world, but the ego self has some problems, right? And the biggest problem that the ego self has is that we think of ourselves as the center of the universe. I don't know if you've ever noticed that we think of ourselves as the center of the universe, right? That phrase, it's all about me, right? Okay, so the ego self is constantly trying to essentially take over the position of God in our lives, right? We're the, what is it, Pinky and the Brain? We're trying to be masters of the universe, I think. So that's what Pinky and the Brain's always trying to do. Okay. And so we can relate to these elemental energies, these basic spiritual qualities, either from the perspective of the ego self, in which case we have what's called a neurotic experience of the element, or from the perspective of letting go of our ego self and experiencing directly the wisdom aspect of the energy. And so again, the spirit remains the same, the energy remains the same. God is always wise, right? But we may or may not experience God as being wise, depending on how we are relating to the Spirit. Okay, are we tracking here? Is this making any sense? You guys are a very serious group. They are? Okay. No joking around for this crowd. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to run through the different elements. And you guys, this is what's in your table. A lot of this information is in your table. Okay. So the first element is space, and space is kind of different in a way as an element because it doesn't seem to have much form, right? It literally is the three-dimensional reality that we find ourselves in. So we occupy space, and we are in space all the time, but we really kind of take that for granted. Right? We really take that for granted. But this is a very powerful element. This is a container element. And one of the things in your handout that you'll see is that for each element, I've given you some kind of key scripture passages. But of course, so for space, one of the places that shows up is actually immediately in the Bible, right? Originally, the earth is without form and void, right? So that's the basic space that God begins to work with. And so the wisdom aspect of space, because, space is very big, it's very open, and so this is the quality of equanimity. This is this quality of being just unruffled, kind of unruffled by anything, right? So God can accommodate everything, all people, all beings. This is this theological idea, right, that in the Bible God says, I created everything, right? Everything, good, evil, all that happens, right? God is the whole space. And so this is a wisdom of this kind of radical acceptance, very spacious hospitality, right? So one of the things about this system is that we each tend to manifest more strongly one or two of these elements. So one way to use this is kind of like one of these personality profiles, you know, like the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs or something that people are into. We begin to get a sense of what is kind of our dominant energy and element. Right? And that can be very helpful for us. Okay, so this wisdom aspect, a person that is manifesting this wisdom aspect, again, is this kind of person that is very open, very accepting. Maybe they don't say very much, a lot, but when they say something, it's really worthwhile. They're a person that is really able to kind of create and hold a container, right? A lot of effective leaders that can create healthy environments maybe are manifesting this quality. And again, when we go to a place that's very open and spacious and we can experience the kind of peace, sort of we just sit and it's really nice and we're like, wow, this is really great. Like I can just kind of unwind. That is often we are connecting with the wisdom of the space element. Now the neurotic aspect then, and so the neurotic aspects of the energies are formed by the ego taking one of two stances in relation to this energy. Right, so on the one hand, the ego maybe is trying to capture this energy for itself. Like, I want to be in control of it. Or the other way is that sometimes the ego feels like, oh, I don't have this. I don't have enough of this, or I'm rejecting it. Right, so you'll see as we go through this, those two styles show up all the time. So the neurotic aspect of the space element, when the space becomes too much, and we have these images of these neurotic aspects, which are these realms, as they're called. So it's actually when we're in this neurotic experience, it's like we are inhabiting a realm, a reality in a certain way. Okay, so the neurotic aspect of the space element, one of the images is of a pig with its head down in the mud. Now, this is the animal realm. You know, I'm not seeing anything, I'm not paying attention, right? I'm tuning everything out, I'm ignoring. I have this incredibly kind of dull quality of my mind. I want to pretend like nothing is happening. Okay? And this is a real kind of disconnection from reality. Now the other style, though, when the ego wants to try to take all the space for themselves, we call this the God realm, right? And this is where the ego thinks we think we're God, right? So any Yertle the Turtle fans, right? So you know Yertle the Turtle, yeah. So Yertle the Turtle, that's the example of the God realm. Right, so I'm going to stack up the turtles, I'm going to get on top, I'm going to rule everything. Well, where does Yertle end up? Right, with his head down in the mud. That was all he could see. Right, so that's a story about the neurotic space energy. Okay. I'm going to kind of move through these reasonably quickly. We can come back to any of them in the question time. So air is the other element. Obviously, air is pretty important and pretty much everywhere. Again, breathing. And so these elements, right, they have a physical manifestation, but then they also have these psychological and spiritual manifestations. So air, and again, in the Bible, of course, air is used as one of the primary images for the spirit moving, right? The wind blowing, the spirit moving, spirit moves over the waters. We talk about that the wind, we don't know where it's coming from or where it's going, but that's how the spirit is kind of blowing through our lives. Right, so this is, the wisdom aspect then of this element is compassionate and wise action. Compassionate and wise action. So this is action that happens maybe sort of effortlessly. Right? We often see comments about, when you love what you're doing, it doesn't feel like you're working. Right? And you're just kind of doing things, right? People talk about the flow. That's a new in thing now, right? When you're in the flow, you just kind of feel like you're kind of being carried along, but you're getting stuff done, and wow, you look up and the time has gone by and you don't know where it went, but you got all this stuff done. Sometimes when we really feel like we're acting with God's Spirit, in concert with God's Spirit, there is this sense of effortlessness and ease. Right? And a lot of things happen around us, but maybe we don't even feel like we're working very hard. Right? And that's the wisdom quality of the air element. Now, the neurotic aspect of the air element is basically our society. Right? So if you look at how our society is functioning right now, we are deeply invested in the neurotic experience of the air element. Right? This is action for action's sake. This is endless action no matter what. Generates a tremendous amount of anxiety and activity, burnout, exhaustion, just go, 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 go. If working 8 hours a day is good, working 20 hours a day must be better, right? And you just keep running. We're always running. It's a badge of honor to say that we're busy, right? How busy we are. Everybody's busy. We're connected all the time. We're just moving, zooming, right? And people are more and more anxious. Right? War is a manifestation of a neurotic air energy, right? This desire to move and to just take over. Right? The ego is trying to take over the world. And this realm is described as the jealous gods, right? So you just have a bunch of, this is like the Greek gods. They're up on Mount Olympus, and they're all just fighting with each other, and they're doing different stuff, and, they're going and they're getting different humans pregnant and fighting over things and doing all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And so all the little egos are running around trying to fix everything and take care of everything and take over. And so this is a very aggressive kind of neurosis, right? And it's very painful and exhausting. Okay, again, water. Water, obviously, very basic element. And, without water, there's no life. So when we're looking out into the stars and the universe and we're looking at these planets, right, what's one of the first things we always ask? Right? Is there any water? Because water is really the container that allows life to spring forth. It's really kind of a magical molecule, an element. So the wisdom aspect of water is clarity and vision. This mirror-like wisdom, this ability to see what needs to be done, to know what's happening, an ability to understand pattern, an ability to make things clear. So a lot of times people who manifest this element, like being, let's say, engineers, or like doing very precise things, like really getting everything in order, detail, right? Okay. And so then again, the neurotic aspect of this is when all of this kind of flips and becomes in service of the ego. So, I'm very clear and I know exactly what needs to be done, and if you all don't recognize that, well now, there's something wrong with you. Right, so fundamentalist religion very much is a manifestation of water neurosis. right? So the fundamentalist religion, whatever religion that happens to be, but it has all the right answers, right? It's very, these are the clear answers. This is what you have to do. And if you don't do that, or if you don't buy into those answers, well, then you're just going to hell. Right? So that very aggressive kind of judgmentalism, a lot of arrogance, a lot of arguing over ideas, right? So valuing ideas, I'm right, you're wrong. You may have noticed that's happening a little bit in our society right now. Right? Anybody get on Facebook, or don't read the comments section, right? Okay. And this neurotic experience is described actually as the hell realm, right? This very painful, attacking, judging, again, extremely aggressive experience of negativity. Right? So it's like all the water is sort of boiled away, and all you're left with is this desolate kind of realm. Okay, the earth. Earth is obviously an element. We're all on the earth, even though we're experiencing it through brick. Without the earth, also nothing happens, right? We'd all be floating around in space. Okay. So the wisdom aspect of earth is abundance. Abundance. There is always enough, right? The earth is unbelievably abundant. Anybody that's ever farmed or gardened, you know that you always have way more stuff than you can consume. Right? And then you're like, I've got to make that 50th quart of tomatoes. I'm going to waste the tomatoes, right? So there's always enough, this incredible generosity. The feeding stories in the Gospels are earth energy stories, right? Feeding of the 5,000. I got 12 loaves, there's always enough. Right? I got a couple fish, there's always enough. Right? That's that energy. God is endlessly providing, endless provision coming forth. Now, the neurotic aspect of that is then, again, the exact opposite of that. If the ego feels that we're at a distance from this enough, this generates a tremendous sense of poverty, of never having enough, of kind of grasping, trying to get enough, trying to get more. Right? You never quite have enough in your retirement account. You never quite have enough for the church budget. You never quite have enough for something. And this realm, this is kind of one of my favorite images, right? It's the hungry ghosts. And the hungry ghosts are described as these beings that have these very tall, thin necks, and they have these iron bands around their neck, so they can't eat very much. And they have these distended bellies, and they're constantly wandering around trying to get a little more food. And they're always starving. So the fire element. So the fire element is the element that manifests love. So we say in 1 John, right, we have this comment, God is love. This is this basic, energetic connection that ties the whole universe together. Right? Without this energy, without the ability for particles to attract, for matter and energy to interchange, nothing would be here. It wouldn't stick together. So the wisdom aspects are love, wise relationships, warmth, right? Goodness, caring, compassion, all of these kinds of things. Again, the neurotic aspect is the opposite, right? We experience deep insecurity, relationship dysfunctions, incredible loneliness. Now this realm is the most important realm because this realm is our experience. This is the human realm. This is where we are most of the time. Okay. You know, we certainly know that we would love to experience love all the time, and we also know how often we do not experience that. Certainly, if we look around, there's plenty of relationship dysfunction to go around. There's massive amounts of loneliness to go around. And so this is the realm in which we struggle. But the wonderful thing about this realm is that this is also the realm that we have the best chance of realizing wisdom, as being human. Okay, so it's kind of this two-edged sword. We experience this in our ego state, but this is the realm from which we have the greatest possibility of waking up. You know, and when we talk, you see, about God becoming human, right? This is why God became human, right? Because when God's, you know, up on a cloud somewhere, God can't really fix our problems very well or even understand our problems very well, right? But when God becomes incarnate in us, and when God becomes incarnate in a person, now that divine goodness and wisdom has the capacity to connect with each one of us, and we can connect with each other. Okay, so that's the incarnational reality. All right, so what do we do with all of this? How is this a spiritual practice? So this is a practice because we can begin to relate very directly to these elements and start to pay attention to these wisdom and neurotic aspects in ourselves and in the world around us. So one of the most basic ways that we do this practice is actually by engaging each one of these elements very directly. And one of the things that we will notice is that we often have a tendency to be attracted to one of these elements or another very naturally. Right? So when people start learning about this and they start thinking about their lives, they think, wow, yeah, you know, I love being around water all the time. I never thought about that, but I really like that. Right? Or somebody I know who very much manifests the earth element as their primary element, and you'll see that there are colors and seasons associated with all these. And he lives in a house that has a yellow living room. And I was like, yeah, so you have that yellow living room? He said, yeah, you know, I never really thought about that much, except that I really like being in this room. Because that color is the color of that particular element, right? So he was very much resonating with it. So the first thing that we do is we start to pay attention to our experience. And what do we notice about ourselves? Right? For example, do we notice, right, that we really like things being very clear and precise? That feels good to us. Right? Or do we notice, for example, that we love the abundance of feeding? Right? We can go home. You can go home tonight and look around your homes, and you will start to notice that there are different aspects of each of these energies. Right? Because these manifest everywhere. So different cultures, so for example, Mediterranean cultures are very much this earth energy culture, right? This abundance and all these colors and beautiful art. You know, if you're in Italy and you go into a cathedral, right? You know, it's not a church like this, right? Every single space on the wall is covered with stuff, right? There's just an abundance of everything, right? Now this sanctuary, right? This sanctuary, what? It's very clear, it's very clean, right? These lines are all very nice. You know, the stained glass windows are very beautiful, but very simple and sparse. Right? The energy in here is very much that water energy. that particular quality of clarity, simplicity. You can really see everything very well. You know, the guy in the booth gets mad if you can't see my face in the light. Right? Okay? Right? So we start paying attention to our experience. We start noticing what is it that we are drawn to. Right? So that's one way that we can begin to engage this as a practice. And we start asking ourselves, yeah, where is also the pain in our lives? Because that's the neurotic manifestation, right? So am I always worried about my finances? Do I always think there's not going to be enough? Right? Do I find myself being very judgmental a lot of the times? Right? Where is the pain? Where is the neurosis in my life? Right? Because when we realize that, you see, we can begin to naturally and very gently move towards the wisdom quality. Because remember, the energy is not neurotic. Right? The energy is wise. The spirit is always wise. So if we're having an experience of not enough, let's say, we're actually experiencing that earth energy. How can we shift that to a sense of abundance? God's abundance with us. Now, the other thing that we do is we actually spend time with each of these elements. Right? So, and this is very, very healing because, again, when we get a big dose of the element in its natural state, that's really where God's presence is. You know, so if we're water people, for example, you know, we really like going to a place like the ocean or Lake Superior or the lake, whatever the lake is, right? That one big lake that's somewhere out there in Minnesota we all go to. Okay? So we can actually begin to spend time with that element and, again, notice those qualities arising in us very naturally. Because that's what happens when we're open to the presence of God's Spirit. That's what contemplative practice is, right? We talk about these practices. So what is a practice? A practice is anything where we are bringing our intention to pay attention. So we intend to pay attention to God's presence. And we find that in our experience. So as our awareness and compassion deepens, we move from our neurotic relationship with elemental creation to a wisdom relationship. And the more that we're in that wisdom relationship, now God in this spiritual energy is simply moving through us, transforming the world around us. And it's our experience, as we start out with in the Book of Wisdom, it's the experience of that divine presence that allows us to be non-anxious. Right? Whatever's going to happen, you know, God's with us in that. Okay, so here's the really brief how-to, which I just went over. It does really help to spend a little time in silent prayer first. That kind of helps develop our awareness a little bit. Then this is the other key part to elemental practice, which is to embrace this with a great deal of compassion. And so we're really trying to compassionately pay attention to our experience and become aware of our elemental makeup. We can start to spend time with each element and notice our experience of that. And then we become aware of the natural movement from neurosis to wisdom. And after a while, we can start putting our energy and our intention in that direction. And then one of the things I always say about the spiritual life is that all you need to know are the instructions on a shampoo bottle. Anybody know those instructions? Lather, rinse, repeat. You got it. Yeah. So we just repeat over and over again. Now, this work is also actually incredibly healing. Healing for psychological issues, healing for physical issues. And again, the more that we spend time with the elemental reality where God is present, we are really invited into this healing space. And this is something that I use with folks all the time, right? I ask, when it becomes really clear what their basic elemental makeup is, I will encourage them to spend time with that element. And it's wonderful and just lovely, the various reactions and experiences that come back. I think that's my last slide. It is. Okay. All right, so let's move into question time. Gone through a lot of stuff super fast. Sorry, went into the dark. I'm back. Okay. So.
Do you want to?
No, nobody wants to come up here, I'm sure.
Did you say the wisdom chapter is still in the Catholic?
Yes. So the Wisdom of Solomon is still in the Catholic Bible. What?
The Apocryphal.
Well, no, in the Protestant Bible, it's now in the Apocryphal section. In the Catholic Bible, it's part of the real Bible. So, we'll forgive ourselves for jettisoning it. All right, so questions, reflections, thoughts?
If you want to use the microphone, it helps the people at home.
Wait. Oh, really? No, this is for our friends at home.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, so you talked about our society and anxiety and all of that, that is so rampant amongst young people today, and we know that, 30% of people are characterized as depressed and anxious, probably in our society. How much of a factor do you think are great technology, such as cell phones in everybody's hands that these kids are constantly looking at, is playing in that? Is that a symptom of our anxiety, or is that a cause, and how do we break that?
Right, yeah, blaming technology is one of our favorite things to do. And I don't really feel like that's the cause, right? So again, the question always from the spiritual life point of view is, how is it that we are relating to our experience? Right now, that could be an experience, in caves, banging on rocks. That could be an experience being a medieval peasant. That could be an experience staring at technology and cell phones, right? So to me, the much more helpful approach is to say, how are we relating to the things in our world? Are we relating to that from a wise point of view or from an ego-driven, neurotic point of view? Right? So there's no question that there is a lot of relating to this technology from a very unwise point of view. Yeah, I mean, that's just completely obvious. That's not the technology's fault, right? That's our fault. Right? And so this is, and I would say that this often happens with any kind of brand new technology or a jump in the human experience, right? So, when we first had the Industrial Revolution, we were like, wow, look, these factories, we can turn stuff out. Hey, let's have children working in these factories 20 hours a day. That'll be really awesome. Let's have people living in company towns and working in factories 20 hours a day. That'll be really awesome. And after a while, it's like, no, that's not awesome. That's horrible, right? So each time I think that we as humans get some new thing, you know, the ego, that's what the ego does. We become really fascinated with the shiny new thing. You know, oh, wow, this is great. Like, now I can use this to incorporate as being the master of the universe. And so, you know, right now, this is really, really brand new stuff, and we are super fascinated with it. And we also don't really understand it. Right? So we don't understand what it's doing to us. We don't really understand how to relate to it. We're figuring that out. Right? And so, yeah, I think that we are certainly seeing all of the neurotic manifestations of how we humans behave through this new thing. But it's not the thing's fault. It again, is how are we doing this? And then particularly in relation to young people, right? How are we as adults, and again, this is part of the problem because a lot of us, you know, didn't grow up with it, so it's super new to us also, right? So how are we as wise adults helping to form young people and to work with them with it, right? Rather than to just say, get off your phone, you know, it's like, well, no, that's not going to happen. So can we be with them in that relationship in a wise way? Right? And it's an experiment. I mean, we're in the midst of the largest neurological experiment in human history with this technological stuff, and yeah, we have no idea where it's headed. But within it, we can still seek wisdom, which is what we're really called to do.
I can't run fast enough.
Hi, thank you. And thank you for your answer on the technology. I think that was very insightful because a lot of people, like you said, just blame. And I thought that was very good. My question is about what you were talking about at the beginning, creation. I happened to just be having a conversation with my daughter about this, and she believes that she's more spiritually enlightened than I am. So she was saying that in order to have spiritual growth, you must be a creator. And I'm at a point in my life now where I'm not creating a lot. I had 5 children, I created them. But what do you think about that? I mean, how am I creating right now? I don't feel like I am, and I don't know if that's something I should be working on.
Right. Well, I'm not sure what your daughter necessarily means, but so if we go back to this, right? So remember, action for its own sake, and particularly endless action, is one of the neurotic manifestations of this element, which, again, that's the context that we are in, right? So that idea that if I'm not doing something, creating something, I'm not creating, right? That's a manifestation of that particular relationship with that element, right? The reality is, every second that we show up as people, we're creating our presence, right? We've created something here. We're all here together, right, for an hour and a half, right? Every time that you engage with your kids, right, you are creating a home. You're creating an environment. You're creating a space that your kids are in, right? So we are creating, you know, this is one of the things that we say about God, right? This continuous creation. God and wisdom are creating the world every second, every instant. Right? And so, so we may not be creating in terms of, you know, we don't have our little Etsy channel where we're churning out, you know, beads or earrings or whatever. But that's fine. Right? And so there's no question that creativity is a very wonderful aspect of the spiritual life. The spiritual life does lead to a tremendous amount of creativity. I wouldn't say that you have to create to be spiritual. I would flip it the other way around, that as we deepen our spiritual life, we very naturally create. But again, that creation doesn't have to be a thing. That creation can be, you know, an experience, a feeling, an attitude, a way of showing up in the world. Right? So we're creating and we're being created all the time, over and over again. Yeah. I think there was somebody further down here.
How much of this do you connect to, you know, in the news we hear about all the crime, and St. Paul is already on track to have an increase in the number of murders over last year, which we saw another incredible increase over the year before. How much do you relate the lack of connection with the natural world to what we're experiencing in our cities, and not exclusively our cities, but especially our cities, our concrete, not much green space areas?
Yes, you win. Yeah, our general disconnection from the natural world, including disconnection from ourselves, is one of, you know, in a way, look, this is what the story of the Garden of Eden is really about. Right? It's not about, oh, you know, this is literally like the science textbook of how creation happens. That's not what it's about, right? This is about the creation of the human ego state, which separates humanity from the rest of creation. Right? That's literally what happens in the story. Right? And so, yes, our disconnection from the created reality, both, again, internally and externally, is the result of that is an incredible increase in all of the neurotic tendencies and manifestations. And there are all kinds of ways that people are noticing that and talking about that now. So people are talking about a category of mental disturbance that results from a lack of interaction with creation. Right? And yes, and when you take people, so for a number of years we had a farm in New England, and friends of ours were working in Brooklyn in a very inner city housing project, and so they would bring some kids up to the farm for a little kind of mission trip, and it was absolutely fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So these were kids that, first of all, had never been in a place where it got dark, right, because there are lights on all the time. They had basically never had any interaction with anything green. Right? So when they first got there, you know, we would take them out to the backyard, and we had our lawn, and then we had all the vegetables growing, and I would say, okay, you can run around on the lawn, but don't run in the vegetables. And they would just look, and it all looked the same to them. They would just say, what's the lawn? What do you mean? They literally did not understand what I was talking about. But in a very short period of time of them being there, you could just see them come to life, being connected with life. Right? And so yes, I mean, the disconnection from the natural world, which includes, by the way, and this again relates to the technology piece and how do we relate to this wisely, which includes people now being holed up in their rooms all the time, right? And never going out into the world at all, that creates a lot of suffering. And yeah, and so all of these neurotic manifestations are increased by a disconnection with these elements, because again, when we connect with the elements very directly, we're connecting very deeply and spiritually with God. And it's very healing for us. Right? So yeah, and that is a big issue. You know, it's the same thing with food. The other thing that we would do, so at the time I was in charge of psychological treatment at a school for kids that were so disturbed that they couldn't be in regular schools. So one of the things that we would do is we would make a Thanksgiving dinner at the school, obviously not on Thanksgiving, but that week. And so I would just bring all this produce from the farm, and we would cook all this stuff. Now, these were kids that their idea of breakfast was a Snickers bar and a soda. And that was their diet. And so when we first did this, I thought, you know, I'm not sure how this is going to go. Like, they may just hate this stuff, not understand it. Well, it was exactly the opposite. I mean, they ate every single thing that we made. And it was like their bodies just knew, like, this is good. We need this. We never get this. And, you know, and we would always run out of everything. I brought a lot of food. We'd always run out of everything. And they would just be like, I just can't get enough of this goodness, you know, that I never get. So, yeah, it's very helpful connecting with the natural world. Yeah, thank you. What else? Somebody over here.
Hi. On the slide when it says spend time with each element,
Yeah.
I was wondering if that means physically, like next to a fire, next to water, or if that means next to the color red or the color yellow, or if that means just kind of mentally in the frame of mind of the positivity.
Right. Yeah, it can be all of those. It can be all of those. So certainly if physically and literally we can spend time with the element, that's great. We can also do it through the color scheme or a particular environment that manifests that particular quality. We can also do it either imagining it in our minds, or this is actually a great use of technology. So a retreat that I've done on this the last couple of years with some Lutherans out in Ohio, one of the things that I said people could do is just, you know, get a video on your computer or your phone of the element. Right? And so, you know, people would just be like watching the waves roll in, or, you know, watching a fire or something. So we really can access it in multiple ways. But certainly, if we can be with the element literally and physically, that's wonderful. But, you know, obviously there's limitations to that. You're not going to go out and lie on the lawn right now, you know. But in the summer, that's a great thing to do. So, yeah. Yeah, so it's any of those. It's any of those.
Any more questions?
Right there.
Hi, I loved your story about the kids. I worked in the schools for years, and I just am so worried about kids these days that don't get outside. They don't have time. I don't know, I was just reading something, I don't know where it was, that they talked about prisoners have 2 hours of outside time and kids at school get 30 minutes. And I thought about that. I thought, it's so true. And they're trying to cut recess more and more in outside time because of testing.
Yep.
So I love what you said, but my question is, did you follow up on those kids that got out to the farm, and did anything change in their lives?
No, I don't know. and my guess is probably not a whole lot, because the other forces are much more powerful than what they could do for a day or two. They might have some, memories that are helpful to them, but yeah, so I don't know. But you're right. I mean, absolutely. This, again, and this is this whole area of spiritual discernment, right? So discernment practice basically asks the question, how do we notice the movement of God in our lives and in our society? And there's a huge amount of work and material on this that teachers have developed over the couple thousand years of our faith. And but the basic approach is that we look at what is going on and we ask ourselves two simple questions. What is life-giving and what is death-dealing? Right? Because we say that God gives life, and where God is not present, there is death. Okay? So, yeah, if I look at the way that, for example, we are insisting that kids grow up and function, and I'm looking at their mental health and their stress levels and suicide rates and all kinds of things like that, what we see is that there's a lot of death-dealing stuff going on. Right? And the pinnacle of that for me, the story that I heard, the pinnacle of that, is that in Palo Alto, California, which is where Stanford University is, there's a series of railroad tracks that run through town, and there's a major railroad crossing that's on the main boulevard, which is near where Palo Alto High School is and Stanford University. And parents of the high school have now organized a group where they take turns monitoring this railroad crossing because so many kids were stepping in front of trains. Okay, so and again, this is one of the most wealthy communities in America. People have everything, all this. You know what? If our kids are stepping in front of trains, like, there's something wrong. I mean, do we not get that there's something wrong? Right? So, yeah, so when we see something like that, we say, okay, well, what we're doing is not of God. It's not of God. What we are doing in terms of, and again, in this system, it really is this incredible air element neurosis around activity. And so, if we look at that and we say, okay, we're really serious about wanting to follow what God is up to, right? Like, how do we start to shift that? Right? What is a wiser way of being in the world? So that's the question that this practice asks, and that we can always start looking at and working with in our own lives. Maybe we got time for one more. Is there one more? Microphone is here.
When is your book coming out?
The book is coming out in the fall. I don't have a publication date yet. But it will be available on Amazon and all the usual outlets.
Which is your favorite book that you didn't bring tonight? It's kind of a joke because he was going to bring books tonight to sell, and then he forgot them. He said he's his own worst seller and marketer. So I was going to have some here, but I didn't order them because he was going to bring them. So next week I'll have some of his books. But do you have a favorite? Is it the one you're writing?
You really want me to commit to a favorite?
Oh, that's right. Shoot.
No, I don't. See, I like them all equally. So, yeah, no, so the Creating a Life with God book is really kind of a how-to book about spiritual practices, also connecting them with the history of Christianity and the spiritual life in general. So there are 12 different types of prayer practices. Each one has a historical figure that goes along with it. And then Leading a Life with God, which came out after that, again looks at these prayer practices, but from the perspective of spiritual leadership. So, that can be personal leadership, leadership in our churches, wherever. And then the one other book that is still in print is called The Collapse of the Three-Story Universe, Christianity in an Age of Science. And that's really looking at, it's a little systematic theology, and it's really looking at what do all these theological ideas mean given what we now know about the universe and reality. So, and I like them all. They're all good. All right, you guys have been awesome. Thank you very much, and drive safely.
Thank you very much. And he was here early and everything worked, so that was great. Thank you all for listening, and thank you all who are watching online. I want to thank Cheryl Fontaine, who was out there checking you in. She was very helpful for me, and Christopher Hart is in the booth videotaping for us. And Fairview did give us a grant, so we were able to do this series, so we want to thank them. And St. Philip the Deacon also funded our series, and all the staff at St. Philip the Deacon helped me do a lot to get to this point today, and all the volunteers that helped put everything together, so I want to thank them all. Announcements. So next week, Thursday, January 30th, we will have our second session on spiritual practices and movement. I'm so excited because I haven't ever done Tai Chi, and we have a Tai Chi instructor from the Marsh here, Diana, and we also will have Revisit Faith Yoga, which will be taught by Amanda Berger, who is on staff here. So please wear comfortable clothes. You can move in, and bring a yoga mat if you have one. If you don't, it's not a big deal. We have some extras, or a beach towel will also work. You can park downstairs though, because we won't be upstairs. They have a First Communion workshop up here. We will be down in the Center for Faith and Life. And so park in the east parking lot and come in that east door, door E there. And that's where we'll start, down in the Center for Faith and Life. Any questions for me? Okay. Bring your folders if you want. You probably weren't going to need them next week, though, as much. If you have questions about the practices, the first 4 in there are from Daniel Wolpert's book, Creating a Life with God. So those are, he talked about having a person that he introduces and then a practice. Those are some of his from there, and those are just the practices. There's more to them in the book. There's books out there you can look at, some of them that are recommended from the series. I only have one of each, and I'll be ordering more this week. There's some from the speaker that will be Joel Warren, who will be our last speaker. He has some stuff out there also. So I will try and get more of Dan's books next time. Have a beautiful week and a safe week. And hopefully we have no snowstorm next Thursday, so I will see you all back here, and all the people that watched at home too. So go in peace. Serve the Lord. Amen.